I've always believed that the woods don't scare you outright. They wear you down first. They take away the sense of direction, the scale of things, the sound of human life, until all you're left with is your heartbeat echoing inside your own skull. That's what the Bitterroot Forest did to me. We came up here looking for solitude. It was supposed to be a quiet trip, a few nights of camping along the old fire roads near the Montana-Idaho border. I'd been here once years ago when the ranger stations were still operational. Now, most were abandoned. Half-collapsed roofs, moss-choked doorways, the kind of places that smell like soaked bark and rust. The forest was beautiful in that lonely kind of way. Tall lodgepole pines in endless ranks, their trunks thin and black against a gray sky. The air was cold enough to make each breath visible. The last sign of civilization had been 40 miles back. A gas station that sold jerky, instant coffee, and maps printed a decade out of date. I parked the truck by an old trail marker that had no legible writing left, only a carved 7. According to my map, a ranger cabin, Station 7, was less than 3 miles up a narrow path. That was where we'd camp. The trail was overgrown, half reclaimed by the forest. Fallen logs crossed the path like barricades. Branches clawed at my jacket as I moved. The sound of the forest was muffled, the kind of heavy silence that seems to press down on your skull. I tried to brush it off. It was late afternoon. The light was dimming faster than expected. We found the cabin just before dusk. It sat in a small clearing, the forest swallowing it on all sides. The roof was sagging, and one shutter hung loose, slapping softly in the wind. The ranger emblem above the door was faded to the color of old bone. Inside, it smelled like wet wood and something faintly metallic, blood maybe, or rust. The cabin had one small window, a broken table, and a wood stove tilted to one side. But what caught my eye first were the letters. Dozens of them, maybe more. They were stacked neatly on the table, yellowed and soft with moisture. Some were sealed, others left open. Most were addressed in pencil to something called the Lost Ones. The handwriting varied, some tidy, others frantic, some written on notebook paper, others on torn scraps of maps or receipts. The first one I read said, "To the lost ones, please tell me where she went. I heard her last night near the creek. I followed her voice until sunrise. There was no one there." Another read, "If you can read this, I need help finding my way back to the road. I've been walking for days. The trail loops on itself. I can hear you breathing when I sleep. The paper felt damp and cold, and the graphite smeared across my thumb. I remember laughing quietly then, just to break the tension that had crept in without warning. Guess someone had a sense of humor," I said aloud, though there was no one around to hear me. Still, I couldn't stop reading. The letters went back decades, judging by the paper. A few were recent. The ink hadn't faded yet. They said if you write to them, they'll write back. That one was written in red pen, the kind that bleeds through the paper. By nightfall, the wind had started to rise. It hissed through the cracks in the walls, rattling loose shingles. I built a small fire in the stove, though it smoked like hell. The light from it flickered across the walls, bringing the cabin's details into uneven relief. Old maps pinned up with nails, a faded calendar stuck on 1993, a rusted radio. Outside, the trees swayed like slow-moving shadows. I ate a protein bar and sat at the table, staring at the pile of letters again. Some had been stacked recently, less dusty than the rest. I didn't want to admit it, but I was unsettled. Who had been here before me? Who left these messages behind, and to whom were they writing? That was when the idea hit me. I pulled out my notebook and tore a page from it. The pencil in my hand shook slightly. Not from fear, just from the cold, I told myself. I wrote, "To the lost ones, if you're still out there, maybe you can help me find my friend. He went missing near the Ridge Trail yesterday. I followed his tracks to the creek and lost them in the mud. He had our only radio. If you can read this, well, just send him back, all right?" I smiled at how absurd it felt. I folded the note, set it on the table with the others, and said under my breath, "Let's see if the mail service still runs out here." Then I lay down in my sleeping bag, the fire dying to embers. Sometime in the night, I woke to the faintest sound, paper shifting. A soft scrape, like something being dragged across the table. I opened my eyes, but the cabin was dark except for the dull red glow of the stove. The wind outside had stopped. The silence pressed in again. I listened, holding my breath. The sound came again, faint, deliberate. When I sat up, the paper stack had moved. My note was no longer on top. I thought maybe I'd knocked it over earlier, but when I got up to check, the note wasn't anywhere near the edge of the table. Instead, there was something else, a new piece of paper, folded once, resting on top of the pile. It wasn't there before. I unfolded it slowly, my fingers trembling. The handwriting was unmistakable. I'm here. Don't come looking. It was signed with his name. The same handwriting I'd seen in his notebook, the same friend I'd written about. I dropped the letter and stumbled back, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The air felt colder suddenly, as if the cabin itself was holding its breath. Outside, something knocked against the window once, a dull, single thud. When I turned, I saw movement, a shadow crossing just beyond the glass, and then the faintest sound of footsteps in the leaves. He was supposed to be gone. I didn't move for what felt like an hour, just stood there, staring at that window, waiting for another sound. The forest outside had gone completely still again. Not even the wind dared move through the trees. Finally, I forced myself to step closer to the glass. My breath fogged it instantly, and for a split second, I thought I saw something pale reflected behind me, too tall, too thin. I spun around. The room was empty. Only the dying orange glow from the stove painted long shadows up the walls. The letter was still there on the table. I picked it up again with shaking hands. The handwriting was perfect, not a crude imitation, not messy or mismatched. It was his writing. Even the way he crossed his T's, long, like he was slashing the page. I kept saying to myself, there's an explanation. There's always an explanation. Maybe he had come back. Maybe he'd found me. Maybe he'd left the letter while I slept. But that didn't make sense either. The trail had been washed out. I hadn't seen any sign of him since he vanished 2 nights ago by the creek. And if he had really come back, why leave a note instead of waking me up? I grabbed my flashlight and unlatched the cabin door. The hinges screamed as I pushed it open. The beam of light cut through the darkness, catching on fog that had rolled in thick across the ground. The air outside was icy and wet and smelled faintly of sulfur, like struck matches. "Hello?" I called out. My voice died before it reached the tree line. No answer. But I heard movement again, soft, rhythmic. Footsteps, maybe, or dripping water. I took a few steps off the porch, the ground spongy beneath my boots. My breath came in white clouds. I swept the flashlight side to side, and the beam landed on something about 20 yards away. A shape. Someone or something standing between the trees. The fog warped the light, but I could tell it was tall, unmoving, facing me. I froze. "Hey, is that you?" Nothing. No voice, no shift in posture, just silence like the forest itself was holding its breath again. I took a cautious step closer, then another, until the outline seemed to waver. The beam hit a patch of bark, and I realized it wasn't a person. It was a tree. A dead one, stripped bare, its bark mottled white like bone. I let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a gasp. My nerves were shot. When I turned back toward the cabin, I almost dropped the flashlight. The door was open wider than before, and there was light inside. Not from the stove. It was too bright, too cold. It looked almost fluorescent, casting the whole cabin in a pale blue glow. I ran. My boots slipped in the mud as I scrambled back up the porch steps. The light vanished the moment I crossed the threshold. The stove was dead cold now, only gray ash in its belly, but something else had changed. There were more letters on the table, at least a dozen new ones. They were dry, crisp, and written in different hands, some in pencil, some in pen, some in ink so faint it looked ghostly gray. They weren't there before I left. My pulse pounded in my ears as I reached for the top one. We found the cabin too. We read the letters. We wrote one. Now we can't leave. The woods keep turning us around. I dropped it and grabbed another. The light comes when you write to them. Don't look at it. Don't answer it. The third was scrawled in dark red, the handwriting jagged and rushed. They don't want help. They want company. My flashlight flickered and went dark. I smacked it against my hand. Nothing. The battery was new that morning. A faint sound came from the corner of the room. A whisper, dry and close to the floor, like paper brushing against paper. I swept my phone's flashlight toward the sound. Letters were moving. The pile on the table trembled, pages shifting and fluttering as if stirred by a slow breath. The air was utterly still, but the papers lifted one by one and began to drift, sliding across the table and falling onto the floor in a soft rain of parchment. Each one landed face up. Each one said my name. Dozens of them. Hundreds, maybe. The same words written again and again in different handwriting. Different decades, the graphite blurred and smudged but unmistakable. Come outside. The door creaked open again behind me. The air turned colder, enough to sting my eyes. I could feel something standing just beyond that threshold. I didn't see it, but I could feel its focus, the way the dark feels heavier when someone's watching. And then, a voice. Faint, familiar. It was his voice, my friend's. Don't be afraid, it said. It's just me. Every instinct screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. I stared at the open doorway, and a shape leaned slowly into view. The flashlight beam hit part of a face, his face, but pale and too still. The expression stretched into something I'd never seen on him before. I told you not to look for me, he said. His mouth didn't move. I stumbled backward, knocking over the chair. Letters scattered around my feet. His eyes were empty, wide and glassy, reflecting the light like an animal's. Come outside, he said again, though his lips were still frozen in that awful grin. And then the light returned, the blue glow flooding through the cracks in the walls, pouring in from the trees outside. It wasn't light like from a flashlight or a lantern. It was colder, thicker, like mist that glowed from within. Every letter on the floor began to shine faintly, words burning through the paper as if written by invisible fire. They're calling. That was the last thing I read before everything went white. When I came to, the fire was gone. The stove stood open like a dark mouth, its metal skin cool to the touch. My head throbbed. My watch said 4:17 a.m. The cabin was quiet again, though the silence felt wrong, dense and heavy, like it had mass. I sat up slowly, my body stiff, the smell of wet ash clinging to my clothes. The letters were scattered everywhere, covering the floor in a pale, uneven layer. The window was cracked open now. I was certain I hadn't left it that way. The fog outside still glowed faintly, bluish-white, like moonlight trapped between the trees. I picked up my flashlight. It worked again, bright, steady. But when I aimed it toward the table, I froze. Someone had written on the wall. The words were scrawled in charcoal, each letter pressed hard enough to dig into the wood grain. Right back. There were smudged fingerprints trailing down from it, like whoever or whatever had written it was dragging its hand as it left. I told myself I was dreaming. I told myself I must have lost consciousness, imagined things, maybe even walked outside without realizing it. But the cold in my bones said otherwise. Something had been here. I wanted to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to get out of that cabin, but the dark outside looked endless. The fog had thickened into something opaque and pulsing faintly, as if alive. When I aimed the flashlight out the window, it reflected back at me, a soft blue shimmer that felt like an eye staring into mine. I started gathering my gear. My hands shook so badly I dropped half my stuff. The forest was so silent that even the sound of my zipper felt deafening. My breath fogged the air. That's when I noticed the radio. It was sitting on the shelf near the stove, an old handheld transceiver coated in dust. I hadn't seen it before. When I picked it up, the dust smeared across my palm, revealing a faint engraving scratched into the plastic, property of Station 7. I pressed the power button. Static filled the air, faint but alive. I turned the volume up, heart hammering. Then, beneath the static, a voice crackled through. Help, lost, please. My throat closed. It was his voice. I pressed the transmit button, whispering, I'm here. Where are you? The reply came almost instantly. faint, fractured. They won't let me leave. Follow the light. Then static. Who won't let you leave? I shouted into the receiver. Where are you? Nothing, just the hiss of white noise. Then, faintly, so soft I barely caught it, his voice again, trembling. You already wrote it. That's why they found me. I dropped the radio. The sound cut off the second it hit the floor, like it had been muted by the cabin itself. My flashlight flickered once more, the beam shrinking into a thin pulse. The silence outside was replaced by a faint rustle, like footsteps through damp leaves. Slow, deliberate, coming closer. I backed away from the window, keeping my eyes fixed on that fog. And then, through it, I saw shadows, several of them. Human shapes moving just beyond the tree line, pale and gliding like they weren't walking but being drawn forward. They stopped together maybe 20 feet away. And then, almost in unison, they raised their arms. Every one of them held something small and white. Letters. Dozens of letters, fluttering like moth wings in their hands. One by one, they dropped them onto the ground. The papers floated for a second, then seemed to vanish into the fog, consumed by it. I don't know what made me do it, maybe curiosity, maybe fear. But I grabbed my own notebook and scrawled another line across a page. To the lost ones, if you're real, if you can hear me, what do you want? I folded it and set it on the table. The moment it touched the wood, every letter on the floor trembled. The walls groaned, the cabin shuddering like something massive had brushed against it. The stove door slammed shut on its own. Then a noise began, low at first, like distant wind, but growing fast. A deep, resonant hum rising from beneath the floorboards. I pressed my ear against the wall and felt vibrations like the earth itself was speaking. The letters lifted again, swirling through the air, spinning faster and faster until they blurred into a white spiral that filled the cabin. My flashlight burst, plunging everything into darkness except the faint luminescence of the letters. Words began to appear across the swirling paper, glowing faintly blue. They were writing themselves midair, line by line, like invisible hands guiding the graphite. You wrote to us. Now you belong to the words. The letters slammed against the walls, sticking to them like wet leaves. Within seconds, every surface was covered, walls, ceiling, even the floor under my boots, and all of them whispered. I can't describe the sound properly. It wasn't one voice, but hundreds, layered, murmuring, desperate. I could feel the vibrations through my ribs. My own name echoed in their whispers, each syllable breaking apart into something older, wetter, like the sound of soil shifting under roots. I tried to tear one of the letters from the wall. It didn't move. It was fused to the wood, pulsing faintly, like it had a heartbeat. The whispering grew louder. My vision blurred. For a moment, I thought I saw faces in the paper, pressed into it like wax figures beneath thin skin. I screamed, and somewhere, deep beneath the noise, I heard him again. My friend's voice, clear and broken. They write us down, he said, and we stay. The letters closest to me began to curl inward, their corners blackening as if burning from within. Smoke filled the cabin, acrid and sweet. I ran. I didn't stop to grab my gear, or the notebook, or the flashlight. I shoved the door open and stumbled into the fog. The air outside hit me like ice water, burning my lungs. The moment I crossed the threshold, the whispering stopped. I turned back. The cabin's windows were glowing faintly blue. I thought I saw someone standing inside, thin, unmoving, watching me through the glass. It wasn't him. It wasn't anyone I recognized. The fog around me began to shift, the shapes moving again, slow and deliberate, closing in. I started running toward where I thought the trail was. The forest felt endless. Every direction looked the same. The fog swallowed my footprints almost instantly. Behind me, the cabin groaned like something exhaling. And then, from somewhere deep in the trees, a voice whispered, soft, almost kind, "Don't leave your letter unanswered." I ran until my lungs burned. The beam from my headlamp bounced across the trees, flashing pale bark and nothing else. Every turn looked the same. Every step sank into damp earth that gave a sucking sound, as if the ground itself wanted to hold me in place. The forest had changed. I knew this trail. I'd hiked it coming in, followed the markers, counted the switchbacks, but now there were no signs. The pines pressed closer, their trunks tighter together, leaning at angles that shouldn't have been possible. The moonlight, or whatever pale imitation of it filtered through the fog, made everything shimmer. I didn't hear the cabin behind me anymore, but I could feel it, like a weight between my shoulder blades, tugging me back with every step. Then, somewhere behind me, the sound of paper again. A slow, steady rustle. I turned off my headlamp and crouched, listening. The sound moved between the trees, that soft but deliberate circling. My breathing sounded too loud, so I covered my mouth with my sleeve. Something brushed against my boot. I looked down. A piece of paper lay in the moss, half buried, edges damp and torn. I reached for it with trembling fingers. It was my own handwriting. The same note I'd written inside the cabin, the one I'd left on the table. Only now it was covered in new lines written in another hand. You left too soon. We can't follow words that end. I dropped it like it was burning. The fog around me pulsed once, the color draining from the trees as if something invisible had blinked. And then, silence again. I forced myself to keep walking. I followed the incline upward, hoping the ridge would lead me back toward the road. The higher I climbed, the colder it got. The air thinned, and a low hum carried through the trees, a sound like electricity, faint but constant. When I reached the top of the ridge, I saw it. The cabin. The same cabin. Sitting in the clearing below, lantern light flickering in the window. I don't remember falling to my knees, but suddenly I was there, staring down at it through the branches, my stomach churning. The trail had looped. I'd been walking for hours, and I'd ended up right back where I started. I felt something warm against my palm. I looked down and realized I was still holding the page, though I could have sworn I dropped it miles ago. My handwriting had begun to fade, the graphite running like ink in the rain. The new words at the bottom were clearer now, freshly written. You're almost ready to stay. I don't know why, but I started laughing, quiet, breathless. The sound echoed strangely, like the forest didn't know how to return it properly. Then a voice joined in, just beneath the laughter. My friends, you shouldn't have written it. The sound came from below, near the cabin. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, facing me. The fog glowed faintly around him, blue-white like a halo, but his shadow was wrong. It stretched uphill toward me instead of behind him. Come down, he said. They'll help you understand. Every instinct screamed no, but something about his tone, the calm certainty of it, almost made me obey. He turned and started walking toward the cabin door. I could hear the soft crunch of his boots on the frost-bitten grass. And then, behind him, another figure stepped out of the trees. Then another, and another, a dozen of them at least. Men and women of all ages, their clothes decades out of place, parkas from the 70s, old canvas packs, boots that had rotted into ribbons. They followed him silently, each carrying a piece of paper that glowed faintly in their hands. When they reached the cabin, the door opened on its own. A light poured out, not firelight, not electricity, something else entirely. It was colorless, but bright enough to cast their faces into flat, hollow shapes. He turned back to me one last time, and for a moment I thought I saw recognition flicker in his eyes, like a fragment of the person he'd been. Write one more, he said. Then you can go. The door closed. I stayed on the ridge until dawn. When the fog finally began to break, I stumbled back down the slope, following the sun through the trees. The light made me dizzy. It felt too bright, too warm, as if I'd been underground for days. Eventually, the forest began to open up, and the outline of the road appeared between the branches. My truck was still there, covered in dew. Everything looked normal again. But when I opened the driver's door, something slid off the seat and fluttered to the ground. Another letter. It was folded neatly, clean and dry, no mud or moisture. My name was written on the front in block letters, my friend's handwriting again. Inside it read, "You left me there. Now it's your turn to wait." I dropped it, jumped into the truck, and started the engine. The sound of it roared in my skull like thunder, almost drowning out the ringing in my ears. I drove until the forest fell away and the mountains opened up. until I saw power lines and the faint outline of a radio tower in the distance. But even as I left the wilderness behind, the letters didn't stop. They started showing up in the mail, plain envelopes with no return address. I burned the first few, but they kept coming. Each one had new writing inside. Some were signed with names I didn't know. Others had no signature at all. One was written in my own hand. You said you'd write back. Sometimes, when the night is quiet enough, I hear that sound again, the faint shifting of paper. And I think about that cabin, about how the letters kept growing, multiplying, answering, and about the last thing my friend ever said to me: they write us down and we stay. I haven't written another word since. For weeks after I got out, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that cabin glowing through the fog, letters fluttering like wings. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, half expecting to find paper scattered across the floor around my bed. I moved out of the city not long after, rented a small trailer on the edge of nowhere, dry plains, no trees, no forests. I told myself that if I could see the horizon in every direction, nothing could sneak up on me again. But the letters found me. The first arrived 3 days after I moved in. A plain envelope with no stamp, no address, just my name, scrawled in faint pencil. Inside was a single sentence written on the same kind of brittle yellow paper I'd seen in the cabin. The lost ones don't forget. I burned it immediately. But when I woke up the next morning, there were ashes on my doorstep, shaped into the outline of an envelope. That's when I realized it wasn't the forest that had changed. It was me. I'd carried something out with me, something that didn't want to stay behind. I started recording my days, trying to track patterns, looking for rational explanations. Maybe I was hallucinating. Maybe it was guilt. I'd left him behind, after all. The brain makes monsters out of remorse. That's what I told myself. But the more I tried to reason it away, the more the world itself began to feel written. Some days I'd wake to find words scrawled in the condensation on my window. Simple things at first: wake up, write back. I thought I was doing it in my sleep until I noticed the letters were always backwards, as if written from the other side of the glass. Other nights, I'd hear the faint rustle of paper, coming from nowhere in particular. I'd search every corner of the trailer, rip through drawers and cabinets and find nothing. But if I stood perfectly still and held my breath, I could almost make out voices, soft, layered, like 100 people whispering at once just beneath hearing. They always said the same thing: finish it. I tried to ignore it. I stopped keeping notebooks. I threw away every scrap of paper I owned. I even tore the labels off my canned food just to see blank metal instead of words. But they started finding other ways. The letters began appearing carved into wood, scratched into glass, etched into dust on my windshield. Every medium turned into a message. One morning, I walked outside to find the dirt behind my trailer covered in thin lines of ash, letters forming a single word over and over, spiraling outward from my door. Write. It was a command, not a plea. That's when I broke. I sat at my table, hands trembling, and picked up a pen for the first time in weeks. My body felt weightless, my chest hollow. I didn't know what I was going to write, only that I had to. It felt like something inside me was twisting tighter the longer I resisted. I wrote, "To the lost ones, if this is what you want, take it. I'm done running." The air in the trailer shifted. The lights flickered. A low hum began, familiar, like the one that had come from beneath the cabin floor. The paper beneath my hand grew hot, and for a moment I thought it might burst into flame. Then slowly, letters began to form on the page beneath my words, written by no hand I could see. We only answer what's written. You wrote for help. You wrote for him. You wrote for us. Now we write you down. My vision tunneled. The hum deepened until it was all I could hear. The air turned thick, suffocating. I dropped the pen and staggered back. The paper pulsed once, like a heartbeat, and then the ink bled outward, darkening the page until it turned completely black. The hum stopped. The lights went out. When they came back, the paper was blank again. My writing, all of it, was gone. The page was clean, smooth, untouched. And there, at the bottom, a single new line had appeared in handwriting that wasn't mine. You are written. I don't remember much after that. Just flashes, waking up outside the trailer, the sun already high, my hands covered in graphite dust. I tried to tell myself it was a breakdown, that my mind had finally folded under the guilt. But when I looked in the mirror that night, I saw something that froze me where I stood. There were faint words beneath my skin. Not scars, letters written in a faded grayish ink, looping along my collarbone, down my chest, disappearing beneath the fabric of my shirt. I leaned closer and could make out fragments. Came to find him. Don't come looking. Now you belong. The words pulsed with my heartbeat. Every few days since, more have appeared. Some mornings I wake with my arms covered in new sentences, written so faintly they almost vanish when I blink. I've tried washing them off, scrubbing until my skin bled. They don't fade. I think they're writing me, line by line, turning me into one of their letters. And maybe that's what he meant, that they don't take you away. They just write you down, fold you into the story, and leave you somewhere in the woods, waiting to be found. I've thought about going back, about finding the cabin again, leaving one final letter to end it all. But deep down, I know the truth. I don't have to go back. The cabin isn't in the forest anymore. It's wherever the words are. And now that I've written this, now that you're reading it, it's listening again. So if you ever find a letter out there in the woods, damp and half buried, with words that seem to change when you look away, don't read it. Don't write back. Because once you do, you're already written. I used to think silence was the safest sound in the world. Out there, past the last rusted mailbox and the gravel road that had long forgotten its name, I pitched my tent beside a small inland lake. The air was cold enough to sting the lungs, the kind of air that made you aware of how alive and how alone you really were. I came to the Great Lakes region that summer to clear my head, to strip my life back to something simple: a tent, a small stove, a knife, a lantern. No signal, no schedules, no voices, but my own. I wanted to feel the world breathing again, to remember what stillness meant. But I've learned that silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes silence is what the woods use to listen. The first few days were unremarkable. I fished, I walked the shoreline, I made fires that burned clean and quiet. The lake was mirror still in the mornings, fog lying low over the water like a spirit too tired to rise. I remember thinking I could stay out there forever, that maybe the world had been too loud, too artificial, too full of everything that didn't matter. The woods, they had rules, the kind that felt older than language. You respect them, they leave you be. But on the fourth night, something changed. It started with a sound, soft, deliberate, almost polite, a faint tapping against the tent fabric, not the scratch of a branch, not the rustle of a raccoon. It was rhythmic, spaced just enough apart to feel intentional. Tap, tap, pause, tap. I was half awake when I first heard it, my body caught between the fog of dreams and the sharp awareness that only the woods can pull from you. I froze, holding my breath, waiting for it to stop. When it didn't, I reached for my flashlight, but I didn't turn it on. Instinct told me light changes things. Sometimes it makes you the target. The tapping grew softer, almost hesitant. I could hear my pulse in my ears. I finally whispered, to no one, "What is that?" as if saying it aloud might make the sound disappear. When I finally gathered the nerve to unzip the tent, just a few inches, the light from the moon spilled in through the thin opening, and there it was, a deer, standing not 3 feet away. At first, I felt stupid, relieved even. It was just a deer. Its fur shimmered under the pale light, the way frost clings to the edges of a window pane. But then I realized it wasn't moving. Its legs were perfectly still, its eyes locked on me. And then, I swear this, its lower jaw shifted, not chewing, not licking, moving, like it was trying to form something. The motion was subtle, soundless. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, thinking maybe the flicker of the tent flap was distorting the shape, but no. Its jaw trembled again, this time slow, deliberate, like it wanted to speak but didn't know how. I didn't scream. I just watched. I watched until it lowered its head, and with one final strange half-step backward, it melted into the trees. The sound of its hooves never came. The night swallowed it whole. I lay awake until dawn. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that motion again. That silent, unnatural attempt at human expression. I told myself it was a trick of exhaustion, that maybe I'd been staring too long into the firelight earlier, and my mind had carried the shapes with it. But when morning came, and I unzipped the tent to breathe the wet, pine-heavy air, I saw them. Tracks. Not deer tracks, not exactly. The shape was right, but the placement was wrong. They were too close together, almost as if the animal had been standing upright for a moment before it moved on. I should have left that morning. Every instinct told me so, but curiosity, that old, dangerous impulse, rooted me in place. I spent the day hiking deeper into the forest, tracing the faint sound of running water until I found a small stream cutting through the underbrush. I filled my canteen, watched the minnows scatter in the current, and told myself the deer had just been curious. Animals get close to tents all the time. The rest, the jaw, the tracks, that was my mind trying to make something out of stillness. But by dusk, I began to notice something subtle, something that gnawed at the edges of reason. The forest had gone quiet, unnaturally quiet. No woodpeckers, no crickets, not even the hum of mosquitoes that usually haunted the air this time of year. It felt like the woods were holding their breath. I built a small fire, trying to shake the unease. Flames licked the damp wood, hissing as they fought the moisture. The light pushed back against the dark just enough to keep me anchored in the world of the living. That night, I didn't crawl into the tent right away. I sat by the fire until it burned low, watching the reflection of the flames flicker across the still lake. I thought about how animals see us, how maybe to them we are the strange ones. We bring light where there shouldn't be light, heat where there should be cold. We pierce the quiet. Maybe that deer had only come to understand what I was. It was close to midnight when I finally settled into my sleeping bag. The wind had picked up, brushing the sides of the tent in slow, sighing waves. I closed my eyes. Sleep came in fragments. Then, again, the sound. Tap, tap, tap. But this time it wasn't polite. It was urgent, desperate. The taps came faster, like fingers drumming against the thin fabric. My throat tightened. My flashlight sat inches from my hand, but I couldn't move. The tapping stopped suddenly, and for a long, cold moment, I thought maybe it was over. But then, from the other side of the nylon wall, a shape leaned close, casting a shadow that filled the entire side of the tent. It wasn't shaped like a deer anymore. I remember the outline most clearly. Long, narrow, and wrong in its proportions. A shape that trembled slightly as if it wasn't fully formed, as if the night itself were trying to hold it together. My breath came shallow, the sound impossibly loud in that small space. The lantern light flickered faintly, not from flame, but from the wind pressing against the tent, giving the impression that the fabric itself was pulsing. I didn't move. I didn't even dare to blink. The shadow leaned in closer until I could make out what looked like the thin angle of a face, too sharp, too stretched to belong to any animal. Then came the sound, not from outside the tent, but from above me, a soft exhale, the kind a human makes when trying to steady their breathing. And that was when I realized it. Whatever it wasn't just curious, it was studying me. I don't know how long I stayed frozen like that. Could have been minutes, could have been hours. When the shadow finally pulled away, it did so slowly, almost reluctantly, until the faint outline disappeared into the dark beyond the tent wall. I heard nothing after that. No crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs, just the wind, returning in short gusts, as if it had been waiting for permission. At dawn, I unzipped the tent, my hands trembling so badly I nearly tore the fabric. The air was damp and heavy with fog, clinging to the trees like smoke that refused to drift away. I expected to see prints, something, anything, but the ground was clean, undisturbed. It was as though the forest had erased whatever had been there. I boiled water for coffee, more for the ritual of it than the taste. The sound of the bubbles helped remind me I was still real. I tried to convince myself it was exhaustion again, my body inventing what my mind couldn't make sense of. But when I reached for my pack to check my map, I noticed something that froze me mid-motion. The small folding knife I always kept beside my sleeping bag, the one I'd used to carve tinder just hours earlier, was gone. There was no sign of intrusion. The zipper on the tent was still sealed from the inside. But the knife was gone. I didn't eat that morning. I couldn't. The woods around me felt different, the air tighter somehow, like it was pressing in from every direction. The trees creaked faintly in the wind, but even their sound seemed cautious. I told myself I'd break camp after lunch, but I think deep down, I knew I wouldn't make it that long. The idea of walking the narrow trail out alone, the one that wound for miles through unmarked forest before it reached the gravel road, filled me with a dread I couldn't explain. So I did what fear often makes us do. I stayed still. By noon, the fog had thinned, and sunlight spilled weakly through the canopy, turning the dew into small prisms of light. For a few brief minutes, the world looked almost normal again. I even managed to convince myself that everything had been a trick of isolation, that the human mind, left alone long enough, starts to sculpt its own monsters. Then I saw it. Across the lake on the opposite shore, something moved between the trees. The distance was too far to make out details, but I could see the motion, slow, deliberate, pacing. At first I thought it was another deer, its body gliding through the gaps in the trees. But then it stopped and turned its head toward me. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt its gaze. And I swear it was standing upright. I dropped the mug I was holding. The clatter of metal against stone shattered the stillness, and instantly the figure retreated into the shadows of the forest. I stood there waiting, half expecting it to reappear, but the opposite bank remained empty, silent. The longer I stared, the more it felt like the whole forest was watching me through the trees. That was when I decided. I'd had enough. I packed up everything I could in minutes, tent, bag, lantern, shoving gear into the pack without order or care. The trail leading out followed the lake's edge for about a mile before veering into thicker forest. The light was already dim under the canopy, and every sound, every flutter of a leaf, every groan of the trees made me flinch. Halfway along the trail, I began to hear footsteps. Not heavy, but measured, keeping pace behind me. When I stopped, they stopped. When I moved, they followed. I turned around twice, scanning the trees, but the woods were empty. The sound was faint, almost gentle, a soft crunch of leaves, a pause, then another. Like something was mimicking my rhythm. I started walking faster. My breathing turned sharp, ragged. I told myself to stay calm. Panic was dangerous out here. But my legs were already moving faster than my thoughts. The trail twisted sharply through a stand of birch, and just beyond it, I caught sight of a shadow passing between the trunks. Tall, slender, and unmistakably upright. It was following me. I don't remember much of the next mile, just the pounding of my boots, the burn in my lungs, the way every tree began to look like the same one over and over. When the forest finally began to thin and the dirt road came into view, I didn't stop. I didn't breathe. I just kept going until I saw the faint glint of my van parked where I'd left it 3 days before. When I opened the driver's door, something fell out onto the ground. My knife. It was clean, untouched, as if it had never left my tent at all. I didn't think. I started the engine, threw the van into gear, and drove until the trees disappeared in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station 40 miles away, where the light hummed weakly over the empty pumps, and a single attendant stared at me like I'd seen a ghost. Maybe I had. But here's the strange part. Later that night, after I'd calmed enough to look through my bag, I found something wedged inside one of the side pockets, a small tuft of fur, coarse and gray. It didn't belong to any animal I'd seen. It was brittle, almost ash-like, and it smelled faintly of smoke. I should have thrown it away. But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe because some part of me wanted proof that it wasn't all in my head. Proof that something had been there, something that watched, something that listened. The next morning, I drove home. But even as the miles blurred past, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following. Every time the trees leaned close over the road, I found myself glancing at the rearview mirror. And sometimes, just sometimes, I thought I saw movement in the reflection. Something standing between the trees, watching the van pass, head tilted ever so slightly as if still trying to understand me. For days after I left those woods, I couldn't sleep. The silence that I had once loved, that I had gone out there to find, had followed me home, but it wasn't the same anymore. It didn't feel clean. It pressed in at night like a weight against the windows, a reminder that quiet could be just as suffocating as noise. I kept replaying that night in my mind. The tapping, the shadow, the shape that tried to speak. Every version of the memory shifted slightly, like the truth was hiding behind layers of fog I couldn't clear. Sometimes I'd remember the deer's eyes, how deep and human they'd looked. Other times it was the shape's breath against the tent wall. But what I couldn't forget, what I still can't, was that strange, trembling motion of its jaw. That silent attempt to say something as if it wasn't trying to hurt me, but to communicate. After a week of no sleep, I did something I swore I wouldn't. I drove back. Not all the way to the lake, but close enough to see the tree line. I told myself it was to find closure, but part of me knew it was curiosity, that same dangerous pull that had made me stay when I should have left the first time. The woods looked ordinary in daylight. Peaceful, even. Kids were fishing along the bank near the trailhead. A couple walked their dog. The world hadn't changed, just me. I parked the van, stepped out, and for a moment, the breeze through the trees almost felt like an apology, like the forest itself was pretending it had nothing to do with what happened. But as I stood there, I noticed something subtle that sent a chill through me. Near the edge of the trees, where the grass faded into dirt, were marks. Faint, parallel lines pressed into the soil. Not tracks, not exactly, more like imprints. The spacing was strange, the pattern uneven, but the shape, it reminded me of fingers. I didn't stay. I couldn't. But as I turned to leave, I heard something far off, faint but unmistakable, a soft, hollow tapping. 3 beats, pause, then one more. Tap, tap, tap. It came from somewhere deep in the forest, not close, but not distant enough to ignore. I froze. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the sound with it until it faded into nothing. For a moment, I thought I imagined it. But then I realized the tapping had matched the same rhythm I'd heard against my tent that night. The same deliberate spacing, the same eerie patience. I got back in the van and drove without stopping, without thinking, until the trees were miles behind me. But even as the forest disappeared in the rearview mirror, I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound hadn't stayed behind. That night I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling, trying to listen for something that wasn't there. And then, just as my thoughts began to blur into that fragile place between waking and sleep, I heard it again, not outside, not through the walls, but inside my head, a soft, distant tapping. Tap, 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 pause, tap. I sat up, heart pounding. The air in the room felt colder than it should have been. My phone screen flickered to life on the nightstand, though I hadn't touched it. For a second, the reflection in the black glass caught something behind me, a shape, faint and still. I turned, but there was nothing, just the pale light from the street bleeding through the blinds. Days turned into weeks, and I began to notice other things, small, barely perceptible changes. When I'd go for walks near the edge of town, deer would sometimes stand by the roadside, not moving even when cars passed. Their heads would turn as I approached, and their eyes, those deep, unblinking eyes, would follow me long after I'd gone by. Once at dusk, I saw one step from the trees and stand completely still, its mouth opening slightly, as if testing the shape of a word it didn't yet know. I moved cities after that. I thought maybe distance could fix what the forest had carved into me. But it doesn't work that way. You can't run from something that isn't chasing you. Sometimes I think that's the worst part, knowing it doesn't want to harm you. It just wants to be seen. It's been months now, and sometimes I still hear the tapping when I wake before dawn. Not loud, just enough to remind me. I've come to think it wasn't the deer itself that terrified me, but what it represented. Something caught between worlds. Something that looked at me and saw confusion, not prey. I don't think it wanted to hurt me. I think it wanted to understand me. And I think it still does. I haven't gone camping since. I tell myself I will again someday, that I'll face it, that I'll go back to the lake and sit there until the woods show me what they wanted to say. But when I picture that quiet shoreline, that fog lying low over the water, I feel it again. The pulse of silence, the slow breath of something watching. Sometimes late at night, I walk to the window and look out at the dark tree line beyond the streetlights. The world feels so small now, and yet that feeling that the forest is still out there, listening, never goes away. The trees might look different, but they're connected. Roots threading beneath soil and rock, carrying whispers deeper than we'll ever hear. I've come to believe that night wasn't just a warning. It was an invitation to remember that we are guests out there, that the wild doesn't belong to us. It tolerates us. And maybe that deer or whatever wore its shape was trying to tell me that the line between human and nature isn't as wide as we think, that something ancient still watches us, waiting to see if we've forgotten how to listen. The last time I stood by the woods before I left for good, I whispered into the trees, a small, nervous apology or maybe a prayer. I don't even know for what. The air was still, no wind, no sound. Then, faintly from somewhere deep inside the forest, I heard it one last time. Tap, tap, pause, tap, and for the first time I didn't feel fear. Just recognition. Most people think the desert is lifeless, that all those stretches of ochre, sand, and stone are quiet because nothing wants to survive there. But I've always found the opposite to be true. Deserts feel crowded, like something ancient is always watching behind the shade of a boulder or listening just beyond the canyon walls. It's the kind of place where you shouldn't speak too loudly because you might wake something that doesn't like to be disturbed. That should have been my first warning, but I went anyway. My partner and I had been planning this trip for months. Just a weekend getaway. A beautiful slot canyon hike in a remote part of the Southwest. Quiet scenery, dramatic light, a sense of escape from everything that had been slowly draining the life out of us the last year. Stress, work, debt, we didn't talk about it much, but it hung over us like a storm that refused to break. The canyon was supposed to help, recenter us, reconnect us. My partner's coworkers tagged along, 2 people I barely knew and didn't particularly want to. They were friendly enough, though in that exaggerated performative way that felt like they were rated on how adventurous they acted around others. Always bragging about prior hikes, gear upgrades, how many miles they could crush in a day. The kind of people who laugh too loudly at their own jokes. A group of 4 heading into the wilderness. Safety in numbers, right? We parked miles from the nearest town, a gravel pull-off that might as well have been the edge of the world. No cell signal, no other vehicles. Just the bright sun baking the red earth, making the air shimmer like a mirage. The trailhead looked like a crack in the planet, 2 massive walls of sandstone leaning together, forming a narrow slit that darkened quickly the deeper you looked. From the outside, it felt like staring into the throat of some vast animal. My partner stood beside me, tightening their pack straps. "You okay?" they asked, voice quiet but warm. "Yeah," I lied. "Just excited to get moving." One of the coworkers, an overly cheerful guy in designer hiking boots, chimed in. "This is going to be sick. My cousin came here last year. Back then you needed a permit, but I guess nobody checks anymore. Total hidden gem." The other coworker rolled her eyes. "Just try not to sprain your ankle this time, hero." They bantered like this constantly. I hung back, letting my partner take the social lead, like usual. As we stepped into the canyon, the temperature dropped sharply. The sun vanished behind towering walls that rose 70 feet on either side. Rust-red rock glowed faintly, the light slicing through overhead in thin ribbons. Our footsteps echoed strangely, soft but lingering. The deeper we went, the narrower it became. Soon I could stretch out my arms and feel both canyon walls brushing my fingertips. The wind died completely. All sound felt muted, like we'd stepped into someplace that didn't appreciate noise. That's when I noticed it. I wasn't casting a shadow. I blinked hard, looked again. No mistake. The strip of sunlight overhead should have thrown my silhouette right onto the sand, sharp and crisp. My partner walked just ahead of me, their shadow stretched clearly across the uneven canyon floor, swaying slightly with each step. I stopped walking. My boots scraped in the dust. I turned my body, tilted my head, raised my arms. Nothing. I felt a strange wave of heat flush up my neck. "Hey," I called. "Hold up a sec." My partner glanced back, smiling like they thought I'd spotted a lizard or something worth photographing. I opened my mouth, then paused. Their two coworkers turned too, chatty, impatient energy buzzing off them. For a moment, I considered saying it aloud. "Do you see this? Why don't I have a shadow?" But something deep in my chest closed up tight. Instinct. A warning. Once you say a thing out loud, you can't take it back. You give it power. "Everything okay?" my partner asked. "Yeah," I forced out. "Just adjusting my pack." They nodded and continued, and I followed, heart thudding like a fist against a locked door. I kept watching my feet after that. The sunlight above bobbed gently as we walked, and the others' shadows morphed and stretched with every curve in the canyon. But where mine should have been, there was only pale dust, flat, unmarked, wrong. We hiked for over an hour. The canyon's twists felt endless, and at certain points the walls tightened so narrowly we had to turn sideways to pass. The air smelled like minerals and old water, though there was none in sight. At one point, I pressed my palm against the rock. It was cold, too cold for the heat outside. "Hey," the guy coworker called out suddenly. He pointed ahead. "Check that out." The path opened just slightly into a wider chamber, a place where collapsed boulders created small ledges and natural benches. Sunlight pooled in a glowing circle on the ground. The coworker hopped excitedly into the light, stretching his arms dramatically. "Photos, anyone?" My partner laughed softly, pulling out their phone. The sun hit their face beautifully, lighting their cheekbones and reflecting in their eyes. The two coworkers posed playfully against the canyon wall. I stood back in the dimmer shade, quietly unsettled. "You coming?" my partner called. "Let's get one together." My stomach twisted. Part of me wanted to go, cling to some normal moment, pretend nothing was off, but I shook my head. "I'll take the picture." I lifted the phone. The three of them smiled, genuine, happy, carefree. I snapped the photo. The preview popped up automatically. My partner and both coworkers were there exactly as expected. I wasn't. Not even a sliver of arm where I held the phone out in front, just empty air. My breath caught. A faint ringing filled my ears. I stared, unable to blink, as fear coated my insides like tar. I didn't know much about supernatural legends or creepy lore, but one thing I did know is that if you don't appear in photographs, something is very, very wrong. The guy coworker bounded over, snatching the phone from my hand. "Let me see if I look badass." His sentence cut off. He frowned, tapped the screen, tilted the phone. Where are you?" All three of them clustered around the screen, brows furrowing, eyes darting to me, then back. My partner's voice was careful, soft but strained. Did you just step behind something when you took it?" I shook my head slowly. "No, I was standing right in front of you." Silence. It pressed against us thick and heavy. The coworker squinted, tapping again. "That's weird. Maybe your camera glitched?" My partner tried to laugh, but it broke halfway. "We'll take another one later." That was when the other coworker spoke up, quietly, not joking anymore. "Why? Don't you have a shadow?" All eyes turned to the spot where my feet met the sunlit ground. Their expressions shifted, from confusion to unease to something closer to fear. Heat prickled my skin, not from the sun, from their stares. Before anyone could speak again, a distant sound echoed through the canyon, deep, drawn out, like stone grinding against stone. Every hair on my body lifted. The walls around us seemed to pulse, vibrate, as if something enormous was shifting far beneath. "Probably just a rockfall somewhere," the guy coworker muttered, though his voice betrayed him. My partner touched my arm. Let's keep moving. We continued deeper, but the air felt heavier now, like the canyon was closing behind us invisibly. Our footsteps sounded wrong, muffled, yet too close to our ears. The walls loomed higher, shutting out more sky. And then, at a sharp bend in the canyon, we saw someone. A lone hiker stood 50 feet ahead, facing the opposite direction. They wore a wide-brimmed hat, dusty clothes, and a heavy pack. Their posture was rigid, unnatural, like they were bracing against something. "Hey," the guy coworker called. "Everything okay?" The hiker didn't move. We slowed, caution replacing curiosity. As we approached, I felt a coldness roll through me, like passing under a waterfall of icy air. The hiker finally turned. Their face, I don't know how else to say it. They had no eyes. Smooth skin stretched where eye sockets should be, as if someone had simply erased that part of them. Yet I could feel them looking right at us. They opened their mouth, not to speak, but to breathe. A long, shaky inhale, like they'd been holding their breath for hours. No lips moved, no sound of air, just that chilling sense of being noticed. And then I saw their feet, no shadow underneath. My blood froze. The hiker raised one trembling arm and pointed deeper into the canyon. Not beckoning, warning. And then they bolted, pushing past us, brushing my shoulder as they ran faster than I knew a human could move, stumbling but desperate, disappearing around the bend we had just come from. No one said anything for a long moment. My partner was the first to speak, voice raw. "We should go after them. They might be in trouble." But the coworker shook their head violently. Nope, I'm not chasing some eyeless creep through a maze canyon." I swallowed hard. My mouth felt full of dust. The canyon ahead darkened. Only a narrow strip of sky remained visible above, like the world was narrowing to a single point. A voice, my own or something deeper, whispered inside me. It's too late to turn back. We pressed on. But every step felt like a lie. Every step felt like we were walking deeper into something that had already chosen us. And somewhere behind us, echoing faintly down the winding stone corridors, came the unmistakable sound of someone or something breathing, not like lungs filling with air. No, this was hungrier, like the canyon itself had decided to inhale. The air changed after we saw the eyeless hiker. Not in temperature, though it did feel colder, but in weight. Every breath seemed to drag low in my chest, like the atmosphere was turning thick and sluggish. Even the light overhead felt weaker. The sun was still there, but the canyon walls seemed to swallow its brightness before it touched the ground. The path narrowed until we were walking single file again. I stayed near the back. My partner looked over their shoulder every few steps, checking on me with worried eyes. I wanted to reassure them, say something comforting, but I didn't want to open my mouth. I didn't want to admit the fear making my teeth chatter slightly. Because what if the canyon listened? The coworkers whispered up ahead. "What the hell was wrong with that guy?" The woman muttered. "Did you see his face?" "He probably lost his gear, dehydrated, maybe some infection made his eyes." That wasn't infection. They didn't say the other part aloud. You saw he didn't cast a shadow either. I felt it silently pulsing between us like a secret none of us knew how to touch. The canyon bent sharply to the right, and suddenly the sunlight vanished almost completely. The walls above connected in places, forming a twisting tunnel that stretched ahead, tight and uneven. Our footsteps echoed again, too loud this time, like the sound had nowhere to go but right back into our ears. We turned on our headlamps. Artificial light flickered across jagged rock. Fossil-like patterns etched the walls, shapes that looked vaguely like hands or ribs or long, stretching faces caught in mid-scream. My partner walked closer to me. "We should turn back," they whispered, just for me. I nodded. I wanted that more than anything. But behind us, the canyon seemed darker than the way forward. A low, rumbling breeze, if you could even call it that, drifted from the direction we came. Not wind. Something slower. Heavier, like the canyon was breathing again, and inhaling. The guy coworker stopped and shone his headlamp around. "Do we even know the way back? This part doesn't look familiar." "It's the same path," I said, though I wasn't sure anymore. My voice sounded thin and unconvincing. We kept walking. The deeper we went, the stranger the walls became. They weren't smooth sandstone like before. They looked warped, melted, like the rock had been softened and then stretched while still hot. Deep grooves ran vertically, like claw marks from some massive creature dragging itself upward. The woman coworker finally stopped. "This is wrong. We should have reached that chamber again by now. We're going in circles." "No," my partner whispered, scanning the walls. "These formations, we haven't seen anything like this yet." The guy coworker cursed under his breath. "GPS doesn't work down here. My watch doesn't either." I checked my phone. Dead black screen, despite being fully charged earlier. Then something glinted in the beam of my headlamp. Metal. A carabiner, attached to a strip of frayed nylon rope embedded into the wall as if someone had shoved it into soft clay and let the rock harden around it. A couple feet further, the torn corner of a backpack. Beyond that, a single hiking boot, laces still tied, stuck halfway into the stone like it was being absorbed. "We're leaving," the woman coworker said firmly. "Now." Nobody argued. We turned around and began walking back the way we came. At first, nothing changed. Rock, dust, shadows, our own ragged breathing. But after 2 minutes, I noticed it again. My partner's shadow moved on the ground. The coworker's too. Mine was still absent. Every step forward and nothing behind me. Then, a shape moved where my shadow should have been. Only for a second. A dark flicker, like something was standing right behind me and ducked away when I looked down. My breath froze in my throat. "Did you see that?" I whispered. My partner leaned in close. "See what?" I didn't answer. The truth was too insane to shape into words. We walked faster. The canyon around us felt different again, narrower, claustrophobic. The headlamps seemed to dim, shrinking their circles of light. The coworkers argued in front, tension rising with every step. Finally, we reached the spot where the rocks opened up slightly, the chamber where we took the photo. Except it wasn't the same. There was no circle of sunlight, just heavy darkness pressing from overhead. And far up on the canyon wall, something long and thin dragged itself out of sight the moment our lights hit it. We froze. What was that?" the guy coworker whispered. Before anyone could process it, a scream tore through the canyon. High, warbling, and violently human. It came from behind us. The woman coworker spun around, her headlamp shaking wildly. "Who's there?" No answer. Just that rumbling breath again. Closer this time. We bolted. Not a coordinated retreat, just raw panic pulling us forward. Our boots slipped on loose rock, scraping and stumbling. The dark ahead felt like the only direction that didn't lead straight into a nightmare. The canyon twisted and dove, and the walls opened wider again until we entered another natural chamber, this one much larger. Our lights revealed massive pillars of eroded rock rising like ribs inside a giant fossil. And all over the chamber, shadows, dozens of them, pinned to the rock walls like stains, warped silhouettes of people in mid-run, mid-fall, mid-scream. They were flat but impossibly sharp, frozen moments of terror trapped in stone. The guy coworker gagged. Jesus Christ. One shadow in particular caught my eye. It looked just like the eyeless hiker. Hat, posture, everything. But this silhouette had arms raised like it was shielding its head. I couldn't breathe. My partner grabbed my hand, squeezing until it hurt. I didn't pull away. A faint voice whispered from the darkness, "Keep going." It sounded like the eyeless hiker. Broken. Afraid. We turned again, following the only path leading deeper still. "We can't go deeper," the woman coworker cried. "This isn't the trail anymore." But behind us, something scraped against the ground, slow, deliberate, something that didn't rush because it didn't need to. We moved. The canyon constricted again into a twisting throat of rock. Our lights bounced wildly as we jogged, hearts jackhammering. The ground sloped downward, shale cracked underfoot. And then the woman coworker screamed. Her foot plunged into a hidden crevice. She collapsed, crying out as her ankle twisted violently. The guy coworker skidded to a stop, grabbing her arm. "Come on, get up." She sobbed through clenched teeth. I can't stand." I looked back. There at the far end of our light's reach, 2 points of darkness appeared against the rock, far blacker than the stone itself. They weren't eyes. There were no features. Just voids. Watching. Waiting. "We can't leave her," my partner said, already kneeling to help. The guy coworker shoved his pack off and hoisted the injured woman's arm over his shoulder. "Move." We limped together, faster than should be possible with a sprain, but adrenaline warps human limits. Every few seconds I glanced over my shoulder. The voids followed, and something long clung to the walls beside them. A limb? A shape? It moved like a shadow stretching itself, bending the wrong ways. At one point, the woman looked back too. I heard her whisper, "No shadow, no shadow, no shadow." My partner's grip tightened around her waist. "Don't look back. Just focus." We stumbled around another bend and halted dead. The path ended. A sheer drop yawned before us, 30 feet down into jagged rock. A dried riverbed snaked through, sharp stones waiting like teeth. The canyon walls towered on either side, unscalable. "We're trapped," the injured coworker whispered. My partner scanned the dead end frantically. "There has to be another way." The guy coworker's voice shook. "We could lower ourselves, rope, use rope." He reached into his pack, hands trembling, pulling out a coil. We worked quickly, anchoring to a thick stone wedged in the wall. The drop wasn't far, but far enough that a fall could shatter bones. "You first," my partner told me. "No, she needs to go first," I said, motioning to the injured woman. The woman shook violently. I can't, my leg." "We'll lower you. Just hold the rope." She was terrified, but she nodded. As we eased her toward the edge, I looked back down the tunnel we just come from. The voids had grown. What had once been small, dark points now spread wide, smeared against the rock like living ink. A shadow detached from the wall, unfolding taller and taller. Its edges were too sharp, too real to be a trick of the light. Then it stepped onto the ground. No face, no features, just human-shaped emptiness, and this thing cast no shadow. The guy coworker's voice cracked. "Hurry! Hurry! Hurry!" We lowered the injured woman. She sobbed, but made it down, crumpling on the stones below. "You next," my partner said, practically pushing me toward the rope. I grabbed it. My palms burned, the descent blurred with terror. When my feet hit the ground, I could barely stand. The shadow thing advanced, slow but inevitable. My partner went next. Halfway down, the rope jerked violently. Her coworker up top screamed as something yanked him backward. My partner slipped, but I caught them, knees buckling under the weight. We both looked up in horror. The guy coworker was gone, just gone. The rope swung wildly. The shadow entity stood where he had been, tilting its head in that curious, unnatural way predators do when the prey isn't behaving as expected. The woman below me sobbed louder. "Where is he? Where did he?" The shadow thing stepped toward the edge of the drop. I braced for it to leap. Instead, it did something far worse. It began to stretch. Long fingers extended downward, bending like tendrils, reaching for us. And as one brushed the wall, a new shadow bloomed there. A silhouette with arms raised in terror. It was the guy coworker, frozen forever. My partner screamed, "Run!" We dragged the injured woman, stumbling across the rocks, searching for any path forward. The canyon widened into a huge, open bowl of stone, moonlit despite the sky being a thin slit above. And at the far end, a passage, a way out. Hope stabbed through me, but died when I looked at the ground. My partner's shadow cast perfectly beside them. The injured woman's shadow stretched unevenly but real. My shadow, still missing. But a new one trailed behind us, not mine, much too tall and shaped wrong. As if something was following inches behind me, its form glued to the ground where my shadow should be. My partner saw it too. Their voice broke. "It's using you like a doorway." I didn't understand what that meant, not fully, but I knew one thing. It wasn't done with me. We didn't have a plan, not a real one, just movement, frantic, directionless movement, dragging the injured woman while my partner held her up, and I kept glancing at that wrong shadow following inches behind me. Every instinct screamed that if I slowed down, if I let that thing catch up, I would become two-dimensional, trapped like the others, flattened into this canyon forever. The air thickened again as we entered the next passage. It was wider here, the ceiling opening to a faint ribbon of sky. A sickly greenish light filtered down, not sunlight exactly, some strange glow cast by the canyon walls themselves. My partner's breathing was ragged. The woman cried openly, pain in every step. "I hear it," my partner whispered suddenly. I halted, heart punching against my ribs. "What do you hear?" They swallowed, eyes fixed ahead. "Listen." At first I only heard our breath and the scrape of boots against stone, but then a voice, like a radio submerged underwater, crackling, garbled, coming from 20 feet ahead around the next tight bend. "Don't go further," the injured woman whimpered. "Please, turn around. Please." My partners shook their head. "No, that thing is behind us." I didn't need to be convinced. I could feel the shadow thing's presence like a cold palm pressed against the back of my neck. Close. So close. We pressed onward, faster as the ground leveled. My legs were shaking from adrenaline rather than exertion now. The canyon's twists and dips felt endless, a dark artery leading into the unseen heart of something vast. We turned a sharp corner, and there he was, the eyeless hiker, kneeling in the sand, head bowed, hands trembling at his sides. Up close, he looked worse, gaunt, cracked lips, skin stretched too tight, like he'd been here much longer than just a few hours or days. He lifted his face toward us when he heard our footsteps. Though there were no eyes, tears streamed down the smooth skin where they should have been. "Don't go deeper," he rasped. "He'll take the rest of you." His voice. God. It sounded like stones collapsing inward. My partner knelt beside him, steadying the woman on a rock. "Who's he?" The hiker's head jerked violently, as if resisting an invisible hand. He clutched his skull and screamed, a sound so raw it echoed like a knife through the canyon. When his breathing steadied, he whispered, "The one who doesn't cast a shadow." My chest tightened. "The thing chasing us." "The canyon made flesh," he choked out. "It watches from the walls. It waits in places where light dies. It breathes your outline first, then it takes everything else." He pointed toward me, directly at me, despite having no eyes. "It chose you." My partner stepped between us instinctively. "Back off." "No," the hiker gasped. "Protect them. It needs a vessel to leave this place. And you." His head tilted, sniffing the air like an animal. "You are already hollow." My stomach lurched. "What does that mean?" He didn't answer. He only staggered to his feet, body jerking like a puppet on tangled strings. "We must move. It's nearly fed. When it finishes, light will no longer hold him. We will all flatten, lost." That was enough for us. We moved. The hiker shuffled ahead, guiding us with desperate urgency. The woman leaned on my partner now, breath hitching with each step. The canyon widened again into a long, winding corridor where the walls looked polished, unnaturally smooth, like they'd been carved by hands rather than water. Handprints covered the rock. Hundreds, thousands, layered and overlapping. All of them flat black. Shadows of hands. The hiker paused, pressing his palm to the stone. It fit perfectly into one of the prints. "My group thought this was art," he whispered. "We took pictures, laughed, and then our shadows started lagging behind." I swallowed hard. What happened to them? He didn't have to answer. I knew. My partner squeezed my wrist gently, grounding me, then pointed ahead. A wooden sign leaned half buried in dust. The paint cracked and flaked, but I could still make out the words, "No further, no light, no safe return." The guy coworker had been so excited before. Hidden gem. Permit free. A place nobody checked. There was a reason nobody checked. "Are we close to the way out?" the woman asked through clenched teeth. The hiker turned slowly, his missing eyes aimed upward. "There's only one true exit," he said. "And he guards it." His voice started to shake. "The canyon is his body. The shadows are his tongue. The moment you step where your shadow should be, he tastes you." My partner stiffened beside me, staring at the tall, warped silhouette that still clung like glue behind my feet. "It's already tasting them." I wanted to scream, tear the darkness off me, run until sunlight burned whatever curse had attached itself. But then, something shifted in the rock beside us, not like a falling pebble, more like a muscle tightening. The hiker gasped, "He's here." Our headlamps flickered. The canyon walls bulged, stretching inward like something enormous was pressing from the other side. spreading cracks like veins. My partner grabbed my hand and we ran, dragging the injured coworker while the hiker stumbled behind. A noise erupted, not a roar, not a word, but a collapse of sound, crushing and low, as if the entire canyon exhaled one violent breath. Our lights steadied. Silence returned. The hiker shivered violently. He's stalking at the edge of the light. We reached a straight stretch, the longest yet. The rocks ahead were lighter, reflecting a faint glow from above. Beyond was an incline, a slope leading upward toward a thicker sliver of sky. Hope surged through me. "That's it," my partner said. "We climb out there." The hiker didn't move. My partner looked back. "Come on." He shook his head, backing away. "I can't leave. He's taken too much. I belong to the dark now." My partner moved toward him, desperate. "You're coming with us." "No," the hiker recoiled. "Go. If you reach the sun while you still cast, you'll be free." My partner's face fell. The hiker's voice softened. "Find light. Don't look back. And whatever you do, don't step on a shadow that isn't yours." The injured woman sobbed harder. We started climbing. Loose stones slid under our boots as we scrambled upward. The slope was steeper than it looked, running on a treadmill of gravel that threatened to drop us back down. I took the woman's other side, and together we heaved her up. Halfway up, my legs were screaming. My lungs burned. But the strip of sky widened, the idea of escape pulling us like a magnet. And then my partner slipped. Their heel hit a patch of darker rock. Not rock at all. A shadow. A scream ripped from their throat as they toppled backward, falling, sliding, momentum dragging them fast. I lunged after them. Fingers brushed too far. Then someone else grabbed them. The eyeless hiker. He held them just above the base of the slope, boots digging into the dust. His face contorted with strain. "Go! Climb!" My partner clawed back upward, shaking, crying, thanking him. But when they were safe again, we looked down. The hiker wasn't. He had stopped moving. His body stretched flat, arms raised over his head, mouth open in a silent scream. Then he was gone. Just a shadow on the canyon wall, like the rest. My partner made a broken sound, somewhere between a sob and a denial. I wanted to go to them, hold them, tell them we would make it, but then the canyon boomed again, a sound like a heartbeat slamming through stone. We scrambled the rest of the way, crawling, clawing. The light above grew brighter. We collapsed onto a small shelf of rock, barely a ledge, sunlight finally warming our skin. The injured woman clutched my partner's arm. "Is it over? Please tell me it's over." My partner looked at me, eyes swollen with fear, as if I would have answers. But I was staring at the dust where my shadow should have been. Nothing, except behind us, at the edge of the shade where the canyon throat yawned wide and hungry, a taller, sharper shadow stretched upward, touching my heels. My partner followed my gaze. Their face went ghost white. "It's still with you," a voice, familiar now, rasped from the darkness behind. Almost fed. We spun around. The shadow thing stood halfway up the slope, limbs too long, body quivering like a candle's flame. As the sunlight brushed it, its edges curled inward, smoking, but not fading. It didn't fear light anymore. The woman screamed. "Run!" The only path led along the canyon rim now, a narrow shelf of rock that hugged the walls. On one side, stone so steep it might as well be a cliff. On the other, a drop into twisting, endless darkness. We ran. Boots slipping on sand, arms scraping rough wall, hearts slamming like prison doors. Ahead, the canyon widened into a series of broken stone bridges, natural arches stretching from one rust-colored pillar to the next. Each one a gamble, cracked, uneven, ready to crumble. But behind us, the thing stepped into the light, and its shadow stretched long across the rocks, not tied to the shape of its body, but reaching directly toward me. I felt it, like claws scraping under my skin, trying to pull, trying to claim. My partner screamed my name. The canyon floor far below seemed to warp, shadows swirling, gaping mouths searching for something to devour. We leapt onto the first arch. Stone crumbled under the injured woman's boot. She shrieked as pieces cascaded it into the chasm below, but she stayed upright. My partner turned to me, voice breaking. "Don't lose me. Don't let go." I grabbed their hand, holding them like a lifeline as we ran toward a distant promise of safety. But I could feel it, the canyon breathing faster, the shadow behind me swelling, hungry, eager. My partner squeezed my fingers so tightly I thought they'd snap. "We're gonna make it," they whispered, but then something cold slid up my spine, a voice curling into my ear. "When you leave, I leave with you." I staggered. My partner grabbed me before I fell, but in that moment my foot hit something darker than the stone. A shadow. Not mine. The world lurched. Stone cracking. Sunlight dimming, air collapsing, and the ledge beneath us began to give. The ledge broke beneath us like a snapped bone. My stomach lurched into my throat as the ground gave way and the world spun. Sky, canyon, skin on rock, all blur. I felt my partner's grip slipping and clawed desperately at their wrist. We didn't fall far, maybe 6 or 7 feet, but we landed hard on a lower ridge that jutted out at a strange angle, like it was never meant to support anything living. Jagged stone tore into my palms. My partner cried out, clutching their elbow. The injured woman landed badly, rolling onto her side with a guttural scream as her twisted ankle took the impact. We were sprawled in a narrow pocket of shadow. That was the worst place to be. My heart pounded with the realization. We scrambled upward toward the strip of sunlight above, only inches out of reach, climbing as if powered by pure fear. The shadow stretching behind my feet trembled with anticipation, like it knew every moment I spent outside the sun gave it strength. The woman sobbed, unable to move. "Please, please don't leave me down here." My partner turned and grabbed her hands, dragging her upward with a strength powered by terror. She screamed in agony, nails scraping stone, but we got her back into the light. I collapsed to my knees. My partner grabbed my shoulders. "Look at me." I did. Their face was pale, dusty, but determined. The person I loved more than the world. Fighting an enemy they couldn't even touch. "You are here," they said, voice shaking but strong. "You are real." I nodded, but when I looked down, the rock under my feet was perfectly lit, and yet the shadow wasn't mine. It was taller, sharper, and now its head was tilted, mimicking my posture like a grotesque reflection with a delayed reaction. My breath fractured in my chest. The canyon behind us groaned, stone grinding against stone, and the shadow thing climbed onto the broken ledge above, peering down at us like a spider deciding which strand of web to pluck first. Its limbs clung to the rock without effort, bending like they were boneless. Its chest rose and fell with each heaving breath, but its ribcage expanded far beyond what a human body could contain. It was learning how to wear skin. My skin. The injured woman's voice broke. "Please, I can't keep going." "We don't stop," my partner said, pulling her arm over their shoulder. Every movement was frantic, jerking, desperate. Adrenaline was the only thing powering us now. We staggered along the canyon edge again, the path sloping upward just enough to believe escape was possible. Up ahead, the canyon walls split into 2 diverging trails. Both led upward. Both glimmered with uneven patches of daylight. Both looked carved artificially, unnaturally sharp. "Which way?" my partner whispered. The woman whimpered in pain, eyes barely open. I stared at the 2 paths. On one trail, the light felt warm, soft, inviting, like sunlight should feel. On the other, the light looked brighter, too bright, like a spotlight, like something trying to look like safety but failing to imitate the sun's warmth. My partner followed my gaze. "The right one, more light." "No," I said instantly. It came out more firm than I felt. "That light is wrong." "What do you mean?" "I don't know. I just know." They stared at me for a long second. Despite everything, they trusted me. We turned left. Behind us, the shadow thing's hiss echoed. Disappointment or hunger? We rushed into the darker path, where the sunlight was patchy but real. The stone walls shivered under the pressure of something massive shifting below. Tiny fragments of rock rained down like dust shaken from a giant's body. The canyon twisted sharply again, and we slid down a short incline into a cavernous space and stopped dead. This chamber was enormous, a cathedral of stone. Shafts of real sunlight cut through holes high above, illuminating thousands of flat silhouettes on the walls. Not just human. Some of the shapes had horns, some had tails, some stretched too far, arms like whips. Others were small, child-sized. The injured woman began hyperventilating at the sight. My partner stepped closer, squinting at one particular shadow, one that seemed freshly imprinted. It was the eyeless hiker. Head lowered, arms by sides, the same position we last saw him. My partner covered their mouth, choking back tears. He saved us. My skin crawled. All these shadows were memorials, trophies, territories marked by the hunter who prowled this canyon. A deep rumble rolled across the chamber, louder this time, like something waking up just beneath our feet. "We keep moving," I said, voice trembling. As we crossed the chamber, my foot paused over a shadow, just one step away from disaster. I flinched backward, heart hammering. My partner steadied me. "Careful, you're okay." But that wasn't true, because in the center of the chamber, I saw my own shadow, flat, perfectly shaped like me, imprinted on the wall, standing motionless, waiting. My stomach twisted violently. "Oh God," I whispered, "I'm already here." My partner stared at it, terrified, speechless. The injured woman let out a broken scream. "We're all going to die here, all of us." Her voice echoed through the chamber like bait. Suddenly, the flat silhouette that matched me smiled, not wide, not with teeth, but enough that its shadow mouth curved upward. My partner tore their gaze away, gripping my hand like they thought I'd be dragged into the rock any moment. "We're getting out," they snarled, a promise or a prayer, I couldn't tell. The only exit was a tall, narrow funnel of rock leading upward, like a chimney. Daylight flickered at the top. Flickered like candlelight, not stable, not safe, but better than staying here. The woman shook violently. "I can't climb, please, I can't." "I'll carry you," I said, even as fear hollowed me inward. We lifted her awkwardly, my partner climbing first, then reaching down as I pushed the coworker upward. Her screams bounced off the walls with every shift of pressure on her ankle. Halfway up, the canyon roared. Not breathing, not rumbling. A voice. It spoke from every direction. Below, above, through the walls themselves. "Leave that. Leave what is mine." My partner nearly lost their grip as they panicked. The battered woman slipped screaming. I braced myself, shoulders burning, legs shaking. "No, she's coming with us!" I shouted into the stone. My voice sounded tiny, stupid. The canyon laughed. Not a human laugh, a grinding sound like slabs of rock scraping together. I almost threw up. We climbed faster, hands shredded, legs cramping, breath ragged. Each inch gained felt like a mile. When we finally reached the top, my partner collapsed onto solid ground and dragged the injured woman out of the pit. I followed, barely, fingers bloody, arms trembling. Sunlight washed across us. Real sunlight. We aren't out yet, I thought. Don't celebrate. My partner hugged me, desperate, relief overshadowed by terror. "Don't stop," I gasped. We staggered forward through a rocky ravine, sunlight widening overhead. Hope flickered. But something in the air felt wrong again. The wind was back, but it wasn't real wind. It didn't smell like air. It smelled like stone and decay. My partner slowed. "Where's the trail?" I looked around, dizzy, trying to catch my bearings. The ravine spread into a sunlit basin, cracked ground, sparse desert plants, and towering walls on all sides. It looked like freedom, but where were our shadows? The sun cast harsh light from above, clear, unblocked light. My partner turned in place, panic building, scanning the ground. "No," they whispered. "No, no, no." None of us cast shadows anymore. Even the injured woman turned toward the sun, screaming in a throat-ripping agony. "We didn't escape. It's a trick. It's not real." I grabbed my partner's face between my hands, forcing them to meet my eyes. "We are not dead. We're not done." Then, a new shadow formed, not on the wall, not on the ground, above us, a hand, its fingers stretching wide, falling like a dark eclipse. My partner shoved me sideways just as the shadow hand slammed down where I was standing, cracking the stone. The ground shook violently. The injured woman cried out, louder this time, as cracks split underneath her like hungry jaws. We scrambled back. A rumble deep beneath growing, a massive shape rising through stone, the canyon lifting and opening like the ribs of a monstrous beast. From the fissure below, a face surfaced, not flesh, not bone. A sculpted mask of darkness, human shape but carved from shadow itself, stretching upward with a hunger that felt older than earth. Its voice made the ground quake. Your shadow is the last light you own. Give it. My partner screamed my name. I turned. The injured woman reached toward me, but her body jolted sharply and she was ripped backwards, sliding into the widening crack. She disappeared into the canyon's jaws. Her scream echoed, then cut off. My partner collapsed against me, shaking uncontrollably. I held them, terrified, shaking too, staring into a living canyon that demanded my last piece of light. Above us, clouds swallowed the sun. Everything darkened, and the shadow behind me grew teeth. The ground swallowed her scream and sealed it beneath us like a secret the canyon didn't want to share. The crack clapped shut with a deep, hungry finality. Silence rushed in afterward, thick, suffocating, triumphant. The injured woman was gone, just like the hiker. Just like anyone else foolish enough to walk this trail and let the canyon taste their light. My partner clung to me, their whole body shaking. I wanted to tell them that she was dead instantly, that she didn't suffer. But I didn't believe it. Not after what we'd seen. We weren't dealing with death. We were dealing with possession. Something below the stone was collecting people whole, turning them into trophies or vessels. Clouds smothered the sun completely now, sealing off the last source of real safety. The world was cast into a dim, premature dusk, a time when shadows should stretch long, but we still didn't have any. The absence felt like a weight on my chest, like I was missing a part of myself I had never truly appreciated before. That's when the canyon spoke again. There is no you without me. The voice arrived as a vibration inside my skull, like my bones were tuning forks. My partner grabbed my face again, wide, terrified eyes searching mine. What do we do? They begged. I had no answer. I had no plan. Panic made everything inside me shrink inward. But something in my partner's eyes, that desperate trust, forced me to inhale long enough to think. We move, I said. We don't stop. We backed away from the jagged fissure and into the basin again. The walls loomed high, too high, closing out the sky. The more we walked, the more I noticed this wasn't a basin, it was a mouth. The ground curved upward at the edges. The rock tunnels we'd escaped through formed ridged patterns like veins. The floor had grooves like worn teeth. The canyon hadn't let us go. It had swallowed us. My partner noticed too. Their breath hitched. This isn't an exit. No. Somewhere deeper inside the stone, something shifted, a heavy drag like a limb being pulled through dirt. My head pulsed with pain. Every echo seemed closer than the one before. We reached the far end of the basin, a narrow split between walls. Maybe a passage, maybe a trap. But there was no other way. We squeezed through, shoulders scraping raw, until the rock opened into another cavern. This one was different. Tall pillars of stone rose like twisted columns, each draped in strips of blackened material, tattered, brittle remains that looked far too much like clothing. My stomach dropped. My partner covered their mouth, stepping back into me. Bodies hadn't decayed here. Shadows had. A low moan drifted across the cavern, barely audible, like the air itself mourned what it held. We moved cautiously along the narrow path curling between the pillars. The sound of running water emerged, faint at first, then clearer, until it echoed throughout the cavern. It felt impossibly hopeful, like salvation. A freshwater source meant life. We followed the sound until we reached the source. A black river flowed through the heart of the cavern, smooth and soundless as oil. No ripples, no smell, just liquid darkness reflecting nothing. Instinct told me to stay away. My partner pulled me closer, whispering, "Look." Shapes floated just beneath the surface, flat silhouettes, drifting like severed skins, shadows, trying to escape, failing. Suddenly, a splash erupted. A hand shot out of the black water, dripping darkness, grasping blindly at the air with long, desperate fingers. A second hand followed, then a head, faceless, lifting above the surface in a silent scream. My partner backed away, eyes huge. "We have to keep going." "Yes," I whispered. "Don't look at." The face turned toward me. Not blank anymore. It wore my features. Only wrong, stretched and starved, mouth too wide, eyes too hollow, cheekbones cutting against shadowed skin like knives. It reached for me, my own shadow wanting me back. The river didn't carry water. It carried the stolen parts of people. If I fell in, I would drown in myself. We hurried past, avoiding the edges. Every instinct screamed to run, but running meant noise, and noise attracted attention. We reached a curve in the cavern, and the path narrowed again until it dead-ended against a sheer wall of rock. No, my partner whispered in despair, not again. I pressed my hands to the stone, searching for cracks, weak points, anything. The rock was warm, pulsing, alive. A voice resonated through my palms. You have come far to give up your heart. I stumbled back, gripping my chest instinctively. My partner shook their head violently. We didn't come here to die. We didn't come here for you. The canyon laughed again, louder this time, mocking, certain. Stone rumbled beneath our feet, then split apart. The wall cracked open, peeling away like an eyelid, revealing a colossal chamber beyond. We stood on the edge of a precipice overlooking a swirling void, a bottomless pit of darkness that churned like liquid starvation. On platforms jutting from the walls stood human figures, dozens of them, frozen and upright. The hiker, the coworker, others we hadn't seen before, all staring at us, waiting. Above the pit, suspended by spines of rock like a grotesque puppet, hung a body. Its limbs dangled lifelessly, its head hung low. But it cast a shadow into the void beneath it, long, bloated, impossible. And when it lifted its face, I knew it instantly. It was me. Skin gray-blue, veins black like ink, eyes blind and glassy, dead. Or a future the canyon was growing for me. My partner choked on a sob, collapsing to their knees. I felt the world tilt, my sanity dropping loose inside my skull like it was no longer anchored. Then the dead version of me spoke, but not with its mouth. Its shadow spoke instead. Your place is waiting. Come home to yourself. The shadow on the wall, my silhouette, began peeling free, stretching outward, gaining mass. Every movement was sickeningly smooth, like a spider unfolding new legs. I backpedaled instinctively, but it followed, its shape stabilizing into a twisted mirror of me, taller and crowned with spikes of darkness. The canyon exhaled like something vast had just woken up. Give the light back and you may leave as one or as none. My partner grabbed my arm, pulling me behind them, shielding me with a bravery that shattered me to see. No, they whispered, shaking. You can't have them. The shadow froze. Then, slowly, its head rotated toward my partner. Then I will take you instead. Before I could react, tendrils of shadow lashed out from the walls, wrapping around my partner's ankles, wrists, waist, yanking them toward the edge of the pit. They screamed, fingers clawing at the stone, tearing their nails bloody. No, I lunged, catching their hand before they slipped. Our fingers locked, desperate, white-knuckled. Don't let go, they cried, tears flooding their face. I pulled with everything in me. The shadow tendrils hissed, tightening, lifting my partner off the ground completely, their feet dangling over the abyss. Take me, I screamed into the cavern. Take my light, take my shadow, leave them alone. The canyon answered, done. My body convulsed. Pain lanced through every nerve as my shadow, what little of it remained, ripped upward through me like fabric being torn from flesh. I screamed so hard, blood filled my mouth. My partner watched, horrified, as a dark version of me peeled away, forming fully into the twisted double that had been stalking us. It stepped forward, towering over me now, my reflection perfected into a predator. I collapsed to my knees, vision blurring. I felt weightless, hollow, like bone without marrow. My shadow wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to the canyon. The tendrils released my partner, dropping them into my arms. They held me tight, sobbing into my shoulder. Why did you do that? Why? The canyon's voice boomed with satisfaction. You are mine now and always. My doppelganger stepped closer, reaching for me. My partner screamed, run! But my feet wouldn't move. The canyon had taken the part of me that knew how to escape. All I could do was fall. My shadow stood before me in a perfect stance of predation, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes empty and yet filled with intent. It was me, stripped of fear, empathy, hesitation, me refined into something brutal and efficient. My partner's arms wrapped around me, trying to pull me away from the ledge, but the canyon blocked the path behind us with a wall of shifting darkness, nudging us closer to the void. My twisted reflection stepped forward, the ground concaving under its weight. Each of its footsteps stretched longer, becoming claws of darkness dragging reality with it. The canyon's voice reverberated. What is yours is mine. What is mine is home. A massive shadow hand formed along the wall, a grotesque imitation of human anatomy, large enough to crush us both with one descent. It hovered above, waiting for some terrible command. I tried to rise, but my legs were weak, trembling so violently my knees nearly buckled. Losing my shadow had taken more than balance. It had stolen my will, the basic instinct to act, to fight, to survive. My partner saw it in my eyes. Fear, giving up, becoming still. Their hands gripped both sides of my face and forced me to meet them eye to eye. I don't care if you think you're hollow now, they whispered, voice cracking partly from fear and partly from fury. I won't let you go dark. Do you hear me? You're not leaving me. Not here. My lungs froze. No one had ever looked at me like that, like I mattered more than death. All light ends in darkness, the canyon rumbled. My partner snapped back at it, screaming like a challenge hurled at a god. Not this one. The canyon's laughter was like tectonic plates grinding. The shadow me lunged. Its claws raked the air as my partner threw us sideways, both of us slamming painfully into the rock. I heard myself cry out, voice pathetic against the booming earth. The monster landed where we'd been an instant earlier, the rock beneath its feet cracking like glass. It rose with impossible grace, its body warping and elongating, posture bending backward as if gravity no longer applied. It came at us again. This time I wasn't fast enough. My partner shoved me away and took the hit meant for my spine, claws shredding their shoulder, blood sprayed. They staggered but didn't fall. They turned, eyes blazing, and punched the shadow thing in the face. Their fist passed straight through its skull like smoke. Run, they screamed. The shadow's head reformed instantly, the darkness hardening again. It slashed forward, claws sinking into my partner's ribs and lifting them into the air. I lunged without thinking. Pain ripped across my back as rock tore through my shirt, but I forced myself upright and grabbed my partner's leg, pulling with every thread of strength terror gave me. The shadow turned toward me, its expression a predator's smirk. You no longer have the right to fight what you are. But my partner wasn't done fighting. With a wounded roar that sounded like a wild animal realizing this was the final stand, they headbutted the shadow. It flinched. Just a twitch, but enough for its grip to loosen. I pulled again, and we fell backward together, rolling in the dust and blood. I held them as their breathing hitched. Their mouth moved, struggling for air. Don't. You stop. No, I whispered, tears blurring everything. No, never. But the shadow was coming, seconds away. It had waited too long to claim its rightful place. I scanned the chamber, desperate, frantic, and my gaze landed on the river of darkness below. The shadows within it wreathed. Suffering, starving for return. Then my mind sparked. If the shadow wanted me, if it needed me, then maybe I still had power over it. You want what's mine? I yelled into the void. Then come take it. I pushed myself up and ran straight toward the edge of the black river. My partner screamed for me, hoarse, terrified, but I didn't stop. The shadow roared, a sound that cracked stone, and sprinted after me, claws reaching. A hand made of night grabbed my ankle, too late. I leapt. For one suspended moment, everything froze. The air, the canyon, my heartbeat, then the world plunged into freezing black liquid. The river swallowed sound, light, time. Cold stabbed into me so deeply I couldn't tell where my body ended and the darkness began. The fluid wasn't water, it felt like ink with intention. Shapes pressed against me, outlines of faces, hands, fragments of things that once were alive. The drowned shadows clawed, not out of malice but desperation. They wanted to be whole again. Something yanked on my spine, not physically but spiritually, as the canyon tried to force the shadow back into me. Pain exploded across every nerve, 1,000 white-hot needles piercing my soul. The monster pinned me against the riverbed, its weight crushing any hope of rising. Its voice slithered into my skull. "I am the dark, you are the door open," I screamed, bubbles into the blackness. My body convulsed. My vision popped with bursts of white static. I clutched at anything, everything, until a hand found mine. My partner's. Somehow, impossibly, they had jumped in after me. Their grip was fire, a warmth fighting back the cold. They pulled and I pulled, not just with muscle, but with the last pieces of myself. The shadow screamed, an ultrasonic shriek ripping through the ink as its claws tore free of my back. I burst upward. The river spit us onto stone with a violent heave. We gasped and choked and clung to each other like lifelines. My shadow was mine again. I could feel it, heavy against the rock, trembling but real. The canyon howled, furious. The walls folded inward as if the earth wanted to crush us for defiance. The suspended corpse of my future self crumbled into dust, its shadow shriveling and pulling back into the pit like a retreating animal. The river's surface began to rise, a tide of darkness swelling to engulf the chamber. Stumbling, bleeding, half-blind, we ran. The canyon roared, furious, betrayed. "You will never leave me. You are light that should have died in darkness." Stone shattered behind us. Air whipped past as the world collapsed in on itself. We scrambled up a slope of loose rubble that hadn't existed moments ago, like the canyon was spitting us out only to pull us back in. Sunlight appeared above, a thin, precious slice, like an eyelid cracking open to a new world. We reached it, burst through, and fell, down a small embankment, rolling through dust and brush until we hit a flat surface. When I looked up, the canyon was gone. Not literally. The walls still stood, but the entrance had sealed shut behind us, as though it had never been open. The sun was warm, real, safe. We lay there in silence, chests hitching with sobs more than breath. My partner was losing blood fast, their shirt dark with crimson. I pressed my hands to the wound, shaking uncontrollably, desperate to hold them here with me. Their eyes found mine, pained but alive. "We're out," they whispered, voice thin as paper. "You saved us." I laughed and cried in the same broken exhale. "No, you saved me." They smiled, small, pained, beautiful. We sat there for a long moment, forehead to forehead, before they whispered, "Do we have shadows?" I looked down. 2 shadows stretched across the dirt, long, sharp, and undeniably ours. Relief hit me so hard I lost my breath again. We started moving, slow but determined, away from the canyon, toward help, toward life, toward a future. We never looked back. But sometimes, when the sun is low and our shadows stretch too far, I see something wrong. A second pair of shadowed eyes inside my own silhouette, watching, waiting, remembering. Because I learned the truth in that canyon. A shadow isn't something the light creates. It's something the darkness allows. And darkness never forgets what was once in its mouth. The fire tower wasn't supposed to be there. I had studied every map, cross-checked the old ranger routes, even scanned the online hiker forums before I set out that October morning. Nothing mentioned a tower standing that deep in the woods north of Lake Superior. But as I crested the ridge, after 12 miles of uneven trail and silence thick enough to make you hear your own heartbeat, I saw it. A spindly, rusted frame of iron cutting through the fog. At first, I thought it was an illusion, some trick of the early light. Then the beam caught on something, a glint from a glass window, and I realized the top cabin was glowing faintly, as if someone had left a lantern burning inside. It was strange because the tower looked ancient, the kind of structure you see in faded black and white ranger photos, long before modern park maintenance or safety codes. Most towers like that had been torn down decades ago after they'd been replaced by satellite imaging and aerial patrols. And yet, there it stood, high above the pines, skeletal and forgotten, its top window pulsing with a dim, unwavering light. That light stayed with me. It flickered at the back of my mind even when I turned away, even as I tried to reason through it. Maybe a trick of reflection. Maybe an old solar bulb left by surveyors. But logic can only reach so far in the wilderness. Out here, reason is something fragile, the kind of thing that shivers when the wind changes direction. I was 34 then, and I'd come out here to clear my head. Life had started to feel like static, endless notifications, sleepless nights, a job that measured time by metrics instead of meaning. I'd been living in a city apartment overlooking a brick wall, and I realized one day that I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt small in a good way. So I packed up my tent, my camera, and an old journal, and I drove north until the pavement ran out. The Great Lakes have a way of humbling you. You can drive for hours and see nothing but water and trees and sky, a reminder that nature doesn't care who you are, and that's exactly what makes it honest. By the time I reached the ridge, the sky was beginning to dim, that blue hour where everything feels suspended. I found a clearing just below the tower, flat ground surrounded by aspen and spruce, and decided to make camp. As I pitched my tent, I kept looking back toward the structure. The light was still on. A soft amber glow, not quite steady, almost breathing. Something about it felt patient, like it was waiting. I told myself I'd climb it in the morning. The trail up was steep, and the rungs looked corroded from where I stood. But the longer I stared, the harder it became to look away. Curiosity in the wilderness is a dangerous thing. It's what draws people off the trail, what makes them chase echoes, what gets them lost. Still, the rational part of me kept whispering, maybe someone's up there. Maybe it's a ranger out doing maintenance, or a surveyor staying the night. When the wind picked up, I heard it. Faintly at first, like a radio transmission buried under static. A creak of metal, a soft knock, then silence. I turned off my lantern and stood there, eyes adjusting. The tower loomed above, tall and spindly against the night, the light glowing through the cracks of its windowed room. For a moment, I thought I saw movement. A shape crossing the glass. I froze. Every instinct in me told me to call out, but the forest has a way of swallowing your voice, and something about that silence felt sacred, like breaking it would invite something you couldn't take back. Instead, I sat on the ground beside my tent and wrote in my journal. I wrote about how strange it felt to be alone again, how the noise of the city had faded but left behind a kind of echo. I wrote about my father, who'd been a volunteer fire watcher back in the 70s, who used to tell me stories about sleeping in those towers, waiting for lightning storms to crawl across the horizon. "It's the loneliest peace you'll ever find," he once said. "You think you're watching for smoke, but really, you're watching for yourself." That line had stayed with me, and maybe that's why when the wind died down and the forest turned still again, I found myself standing, grabbing my flashlight, walking toward the tower. The base was older than I expected. Metal legs rusted to near orange, concrete footings cracked from frost heaves. A faded sign hung by a single nail, North Watchtower, decommissioned 1983. My light traced up the ladder, rung after rung, vanishing into the fog that gathered halfway up. The glow from above was faint now, barely visible, like a memory receding. I hesitated at the first rung. Part of me knew better. I'd done enough hiking to understand when to respect the line between curiosity and recklessness. But the other part of me, the part that came out here to find something real, wouldn't let it go. The climb was slow. The metal was cold, gritty under my palms. Each step sent a low groan through the frame and echoing into the dark. The trees around me disappeared, swallowed by mist. About halfway up, I made the mistake of looking down. My camp lantern was just a pinprick below, barely visible through the fog. And above me, the light was gone. It took me a second to realize it. I blinked, sweeping my flashlight up, expecting to catch the glow again. Nothing. Just shadow and cloud. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it after all, that the fatigue was playing tricks. But then a faint metallic thud came from the top cabin. I froze, my breath caught halfway between disbelief and fear. Someone or something was up there. And the strange thing was, I didn't climb down. I climbed faster. By the time I reached the final platform, my arms were shaking. The last few rungs had bent inward, and the iron bolts moaned every time I shifted my weight. The cabin above me loomed like a shadow suspended in the mist, its wooden siding silvered with age and peeling under decades of storms. A narrow hatch led into the observation room, a door barely hanging by its hinges. I pushed it open, and the sound it made, slow, metallic, hollow, seemed to echo for miles. The air inside smelled of damp wood and smoke, as if someone had once built a fire here and the memory still clung to the walls. My flashlight beam wavered across the room. There wasn't much to see, just an old chair collapsed in a corner, a small table covered in dust, and on it a tin lantern with a cracked glass pane. That was where the light had come from. But the lantern wasn't burning. The wick was cold, untouched. No heat, no smell of oil, just stillness. I took a step closer, trying to make sense of it. Maybe a battery-powered bulb, maybe some prank by local kids. But no, the lantern was ancient, the kind that burned kerosene. I brushed my fingers over it, half expecting it to come to life, but it stayed dark and dead. The silence pressed in. Then I noticed the notebook. It was sitting on the windowsill, open to a fresh page. The paper was new, clean and white, unlike the yellowed ledgers that usually accompany these relics. Its cover bore a faint, embossed insignia, U.S. Forest Service. My flashlight trembled in my hand as I leaned closer. The ink was still wet, glistening faintly under the beam. October 14, 2023, light checked, watch maintained, R. I stared at it for a long time, not quite breathing. That was tonight's date. The exact night I'd climbed up here. I turned around, my light sweeping the corners. Empty. No gear, no sleeping bag, no footprints in the dust. Just the soft whistle of wind through the cracked glass. But the strangest thing wasn't that the room was empty. It was how it felt. It wasn't abandoned. It was waiting. I stepped closer to the window. From here, the world below looked endless. The forest stretched for miles, waves of trees rolling under a blanket of mist. My lantern down at camp had gone out, swallowed by the fog. And for a moment, I felt it, that old primal sense that you're being watched from somewhere beyond your line of sight. I wrote my name next to the entry. I don't know why. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was loneliness. The page seemed to ask for it. I didn't sign with any message, just my name, simple and small under the ranger's looping R. Then the sound came, a creak, slow and deliberate from the stairwell below. At first, I thought it might have been the wind again, but the rhythm was too even, a footstep. Then another. The tower shifted slightly, the whole structure vibrating under a weight that wasn't mine. The air turned colder, sharp enough to sting my lungs. I turned off my flashlight and stood still, every nerve on fire. Through the slats in the floor, I could see faint movement, just shadows pacing slowly like someone circling the base. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but my voice caught. My father's words echoed in my head again. You think you're watching for smoke, but really, you're watching for yourself. I realized then that fear isn't the opposite of curiosity. It's the moment curiosity turns inward. When the noise stopped, I waited a full minute before moving again. I turned the flashlight back on and scanned the cabin one last time. The logbook page fluttered slightly in the draft. There was a faint smear under my name now, like someone had brushed their finger across it. I closed the book carefully and placed it back where I found it. As I climbed down, the forest below looked even darker. The fog had thickened, and every sound carried, branches shifting, leaves whispering like distant voices. When my boots finally hit the ground, I half expected to see footprints circling the tower, but the dirt was undisturbed, only the faint impression of my own. I walked back toward my tent, every step deliberate, my breath visible in the cold air. When I reached camp, I turned back once more. The tower was barely visible through the mist now, but the light had returned. Dim, unwavering, glowing softly through the glass like it had never gone out. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat by the dying embers of my fire, listening. Every now and then, the forest would go perfectly silent, and in those moments, I swore I could hear something faint, like the scrape of metal far off in the distance, the sound of someone climbing. By morning, the fog had thinned. I packed up camp, half expecting to see the tower gone, a trick of fatigue and solitude. But when I hiked back up to the ridge, it was still there, smaller now, a fragile silhouette against the light. Something in me didn't want to leave it behind. So I took a photo, just one, and turned to make my way out of the woods. But the trail wasn't quite the same. Where I expected the fork that led to the ranger access road, there was only an unbroken wall of trees. I walked back and forth for almost an hour, retracing my steps, but every landmark felt wrong. It was as if the forest had shifted overnight, the way water reshapes the shore without you noticing. Eventually, I gave up on finding the same path and followed the slope east, guided by the faint hum of distant water. When I finally reached the main trail again, the sky was gray with drizzle. My truck was parked right where I'd left it, though for a moment I didn't recognize it. It looked foreign, out of place among the wet leaves and mist. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, just breathing. Then I checked my phone. No signal, no messages, no timestamp updates. But the strangest part wasn't that the time had frozen. It was that my photo, the one of the tower, was gone. In its place was a blank black square, like the image had been overwritten. I don't know why, but before I drove off, I looked back through the fog one last time. And there it was, miles away, barely visible, but unmistakable, the fire tower, with the lights still on. I didn't tell anyone about what happened that night for a long time. It wasn't fear of being disbelieved. It was something harder to explain. Some experiences take root in silence. They don't demand validation. They demand space to breathe. What happened in that tower wasn't just strange. It was intimate, like the forest had spoken in a language only solitude could translate. For days after returning home, I kept waking at odd hours, caught between the rhythm of city noise and that deep, quiet heartbeat of the woods. I'd hear the creak of metal in my dreams, the faint hum of wind through broken glass. Each morning, I'd reach for my phone and check the gallery again, half hoping the photo would reappear. It never did. Just that same empty frame, black as though it had absorbed the night. A week passed before I convinced myself to look up the tower. I scrolled through old maps and ranger archives, cross-referencing the coordinates where I'd camped. But the only mention I found of any structure nearby was a note in a 1983 report, the same year listed on that faded sign. It read, North Watchtower, decommissioned following lightning strike. Cabin fire, 1 casualty presumed. That was it. No name, no follow-up. Just the quiet finality of government documentation. Still, I couldn't stop thinking about the logbook. That entry written in fresh ink. My own name below it, smudged as if touched. The signature R haunted me most. It wasn't just an initial, it felt like a continuation, as if someone or something was still keeping watch long after duty should have ended. I went back to my journal that night, the same one I'd carried into the woods. When I flipped through it, I noticed something I hadn't written, or at least didn't remember writing. On the last page, below my final entry about breaking camp, there was a line written in a handwriting that wasn't mine. Light checked, watch maintained. No ink bleed, no indentation, just the words sitting clean on the paper, as though they'd always been there. I remember sitting there at my kitchen table, the noise of the refrigerator filling the silence, the city pressing against the windows, and all I could think about was the tower, the way it looked from below, rising out of the mist, fragile yet eternal. The next morning, I tried to rationalize it. Sleep deprivation, memory gaps, tricks of the light. The mind is good at making ghosts out of loneliness. But deep down, I knew that wasn't what this was. There was something about that place, something that reached out to anyone who stumbled too close, like an old fire left smoldering long after everyone forgot it was there. It's strange how certain moments can reshape your sense of time. Before that trip, I measured my life in deadlines, in clocks, in noise. But since that night, I've started to see time the way the woods see it. Slow, patient, unbothered by endings. Maybe that's what the fire watchers understood better than anyone else. that their job wasn't to fight the forest, but to witness it, to stay until the light changed. Sometimes I wonder if that's what R had done, simply stayed. Maybe he wasn't trapped there, not in the way we imagine. Maybe that light wasn't haunting anyone. Maybe it was a kind of devotion. I went back north 2 months later in December when the lakes were half frozen and the roads turned to glass at dusk. I told myself it was for closure, that I just wanted to see the ridge again in daylight. But part of me knew it was something deeper. A need to know whether that tower still stood, whether the light still burned when no one was there to see it. When I reached the trailhead, the snow was already falling. The forest looked different now. Bare branches, brittle air, but the quiet was the same. I hiked for hours, tracing the same route by instinct. The ridge rose out of the gray like a familiar dream. But when I got there, the tower was gone. Not fallen, not buried. Gone. No concrete footings, no metal frame, just untouched ground, smoothed by snow. I walked in circles, certain I'd lost my bearings, but the landscape hadn't changed. Even the clearing where I'd camped was empty. No sign of disturbed soil, no imprint of a fire pit. I stood there until the lights started to fade, until the trees turned into silhouettes against a white sky. And as I turned to leave, I caught it, just for a moment, the faintest glow between the trees. Not from the tower, from the lake. It flickered once, low and warm, then vanished. That was when I realized something. Maybe the tower was never a place. Maybe it was a moment, one that appeared only when you needed to remember what it meant to be awake. On the drive home, I didn't feel afraid, just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm when the air feels heavy with meaning. I thought about my father again, about the long nights he must have spent in towers just like that one, staring at the horizon, believing his duty was to watch for fire. Maybe what he was really watching for was connection. The invisible line between presence and absence, between those who leave and those who stay behind to keep the light burning. Since then, I've kept a lantern on my desk. It's old and dented, picked up from a thrift store, probably nothing special. But every night before bed, I light it for a while and let the flames settle. I don't say anything. I don't think too hard. I just sit there and listen to the silence. And sometimes, when the flame flickers just right, I swear I can hear the faint echo of a tower creaking in the wind. I've learned that not every haunting is meant to frighten us. Some are reminders. Some are invitations to stay a little longer in the places that scare us, to look closer at the things we'd rather explain away. Because fear in its purest form isn't about monsters or darkness. It's about truth. The truth of being alive and small and temporary. I don't know who R was. I don't know what that light meant or how it still shines where nothing remains. But I've stopped trying to explain it. Now, when I go hiking and see a tower on a distant ridge, I nod toward it like an old friend. Because somewhere out there, I like to believe there's still a light burning in a window that never truly went dark. And maybe that's all any of us are doing, keeping the fire lit, even when no one else